It gives me great pleasure to welcome Sonia Szamocki onto the podcast again. So Sonia was on the Dental Leaders podcast, but I wanted her back on the Mind Movers podcast to discuss the journey that she's been on in terms of the stresses, the juggle. Sonia is the founder of 32Co, which is a disruptor in the orthodontic space, an Oxford graduated medic who went on to Boston Consulting Group and left medicine, went on to Boston Consulting Group, where she really discovered business and entrepreneurship. So it's going to be an interesting conversation about how that journey progressed. Lovely to have you.
Thanks, Payman. Lovely to be here.
What a boss girl. Hey,
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. I love it. Congratulations on everything you've achieved.
Thank you. It doesn't feel like, and I'm sure it never does for either of you either, an achievement. It's a journey and you're in the middle of a part of it and you're looking to the next bit. Maybe that's something that we're not very good at, is taking a moment to stand still and thinking about what have we done so far. So, be interesting to get into
So
that.
I alluded to it in the last pod about you being a glutton for punishment. And since then, my son's now applying to Cambridge, and it's massively stressful.
Yeah.
Massively stressful. He came out in a rash halfway through his exams. He got his results, and suddenly his face is completely different, his predictions. Extra exams. To get into Oxford in the first place, from the Netherlands, you've always done hard things. Are you comfortable doing hard things? Is that what it is?
Before she goes on to that, I just want to say that it's so impressive and so incredible, because I remember Oxbridge was the holy grail. I mean, I was always told as a kid that I couldn't achieve anything, let alone get into dental school. And one of the most incredible things happened to someone very close to me. When I was 11, I had a nanny when I was living in the Middle East, and she stayed with us from when I was born till I was 11. And then she found another immigrant from Sri Lanka, because you know how the community works. And then she started working for my family, and she's still with us now till this day. And my parents are 77 and 67. And at the time, she was trying to bring her son from Sri Lanka to the UK, and my mum helped with that whole process. And he came, and he became a cleaner, and then eventually I think she'd introduced him to another eligible Sri Lankan woman, and they got married, and then quite quickly they had a son. And then I remember my nanny, she made it her job to make sure that her grandson was super successful. And she put all this immense amount of pressure for him. She was like, if you want their life, pointing at me and my family, this is what you'd have to do. And we were like, let him live. And he eventually got a scholarship to City of London, and then he worked really hard. And unknowingly for all these years, because obviously I moved home ages ago, he'd actually seen me, my sister, and my dad, his role models, and he was like, I want to be a doctor, I want to be like Rhona, I want to be like Alex. Anyway, recently he got accepted into Cambridge, and I found out there's only 6 people in the UK that are accepted into the medical school into Cambridge, and he's one of those 6. And my heart just is so warm, and as Payman said, it's such a rigorous and difficult thing, but that drive must come from somewhere, right? Because I don't think I could have I got advised that I could go to Oxbridge for English literature actually, but I didn't do it in the end because I wanted to do dentistry. But where did that come from, to be like, right, I want to do Oxford?
Yeah, I can't pretend that I had anything like the journey that young man went through. I think I had a lot of advantages as a young person. So parents who were academic were keen that we were academic and did everything that they could to support us. So we grew up in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch, Polish, Indian by background. So I grew up as kind of an odd fish in Holland. Grew up as a Dutch kid in a Dutch school, in a Dutch environment. My first language was Dutch. My English wasn't great. Apparently I spoke with an American accent. And
same.
Yeah.
Broken English.
Yeah. And, because you sort of, we spoke it at home, you learn it from the TV, but I wasn't I couldn't read properly. And at some point my parents said, look, my parents had been to university in the UK, and they said, if you want to have the opportunity to also study in the UK, we think you should have a British education, which meant that I went to the British school in the Netherlands when I was about 11. And, up until that point, I don't think, I always worked hard. I was encouraged to do my best, but I was always told or made to understand that life was mine for the taking. The world didn't owe me anything, and that I had been given everything in life to be successful. And then if I wasn't getting top marks, then really I was coming to ask myself, well, why? Because you've had every advantage in life, loving parents,
So what,
good
guilt?
school.
Guilt is
I
guilt
don't know.
a
I think it
driver
was
for you?
an element of competitiveness. Definitely, I think I was very competitive as a young kid in everything, in school and in sport. And then I got into this environment where, again, a great school, and it was clear that I could achieve anything.
Potential.
And there really weren't any barriers other than my own ability to basically get off my backside and do it. So it was less of it was not fear-based, it wasn't guilt-based, it was just a drive that came from an internal degree of competitiveness that I think kept going and led down to some unhealthy places as well, I think, being just permanently driven. Applying to university was stressful. I was completely obsessed and knew that I was going to go to Oxford. I don't know why. I don't know where I got the idea from. I'd never been there. But I knew I was going to do it, and I made sure I did. And I think when I got there, I think that's when a few things happened. I think I found my tribe. I think I found people that enjoyed the same things as I did, that enjoyed school, didn't think it was hard work for the sake of hard work, that enjoyed learning, and I loved my degree. I actually thought it was great fun. But I also thought I don't have to try and beat these people. It's actually really unhelpful to try and beat these people. I'm just going to focus on myself and see what I can achieve. And that completely changed my mindset, actually. I think I stopped making it about other people, and I just made it about what I wanted to do in life.
You never really failed until that point. Do you remember a moment when you did fail and you felt, this is the first time I've ever failed?
Pay. Like, there's a lot of things that I want to unpack here, right? Okay.
Already.
Well, first of all, I want to say, like, you have incredible humility. Like, what you've done is beyond the norm. I don't care if your parents were privileged or not privileged, or if you came, like, what you've done is not the norm. It is incredibly impressive to get into Oxford and Cambridge. Do not just get you because you come from a good background. You get into those universities because you are incredibly gifted and incredibly hardworking. So I think that's number one, that, don't be a typical woman, just like take it. What you've achieved is incredible. The other thing that I'm hearing, which I find interesting, is the competition thing, because actually I found the opposite being in dental school. I was thrown into an environment where I was nothing like anyone, because I was half science based, so like left, right side of the brain. So I loved biology and chemistry, I loved English and philosophy. And I wanted all my English and philosophy friends. So I was friends with people that were not involved in the dental school. And I found the dental school was actually like a way worse version of school, because people were really competitive and very entwined with each other. So do you think that's because the culture in Oxford is somewhat different than, red brick universities?
I think that people go there because they like learning for learning's sake. I think there is an element of that. And so there's also, there's the college system exists to create small groups of people that learn together. So your learning isn't done, there is an element of lecture-based teaching, but most of your teaching is done in groups of 5 or 6, as you said. You meet together a few times a week with a tutor, and it's a very collegiate environment where you come and you prepare something and you debate and you discuss and you learn from each other. So there was almost no point in being competitive, because the more you put into your little group, the more you got out of each other as well. So after I went to, so I don't think it's a red brick versus other types of uni or an Oxbridge thing. I think it's just the structure actually of the way that you learn that means that it doesn't feel like only one person can be successful. Actually, the rising tide floats all boats.
Is the medical degree in Oxford, though, in comparison to the because, for example, Leeds Dental School was very much gearing you for a world of NHS, and that's what they were gearing. Like, you are designed to come out of this system prepared and dedicated to the NHS. And that's what I knew. Came out of Leeds, like nailed loads of extractions, amalgams and dentures, you know, can you believe? And then obviously you go out and you realise, and like one of the things that was really drilled in, I remember my tutors go, whatever you do, don't become a general dentist. Like it was like the worst thing. So either you have to be committed and pursue the route of academia within your university, or you dedicate your life to the NHS. Do you think Oxford was somewhat different in a way, as in, did they want you to be more on the research side of things? Did they want, you know, did they want you to change the system? What was your experience?
Yeah, so the degree is structured differently. So your first 3 years of medicine, you don't see a patient. And that was made very clear that this is an academic degree. You're going to learn the science of medicine, not the practical application your first 3 years. So you go in technically with your eyes wide open, although how much can you actually know when you're 17 going to university? Obviously you don't know anything. So, but that leads you on to doing a lot of the kind of research type work. And it means that at the end of those 3 years, so I left with an MA, which is quite odd, right? I left with a master's. That you can have a natural break at that point to go down a sort of research route and never practice, or you go on to clinical school and then you are fully dedicated to your practical, NHS, learning how to be a doctor. So it was very split actually, and lots of people did leave after those first 3 years. Some left to go and into pharma or finance or into research, or went to do, there was lots of that. And then there were people that went back to and pursued the vocation of medicine.
And what about my question?
Go on, go for it. I was going to say, now you can ask about the failure.
Failure. Did you, as someone who'd never failed, when was the first time you felt like you failed, and how did that affect you?
Gosh, so I'm not going to try and skirt on the question, but I think that I have been an eternal optimist forever. So I think that whenever something happens that is not to plan, my reaction is always to say, well, look, what are we going to do with it, as opposed to stopping and thinking I've failed. I've never found it a particularly helpful thought process to go through.
It's a bad question, you're saying. Yeah.
No, but it's not to say that things haven't gone wrong. I think they go wrong all the time, but I don't know if I've ever seen even the most disastrous things as a failure, because I've learnt an awful lot. And that sounds really, really trite, but I think especially in the world where I am now, where for every 10 things that don't work, the one thing that does work is the thing that makes the big difference. To almost not failing is a really bad thing. You've got to be willing to throw yourself into situations where you just haven't got a clue, and if it goes badly, not to beat yourself up about it. So maybe I've just blocked it out. If there were moments where I really wasn't successful, I've probably just picked myself up and gone and done something else and just forgotten about it. So not to try and be evasive, loads of things haven't gone right, haven't gone to plan.
But did that happen during university as well, or was it more so when you left university?
I mean, I think one is quite sheltered at university. Yeah. I don't know if you found that, you're quite mollycoddled.
I failed a lot at university, not physical exams, but rejections a lot for interviews and things like that.
Yeah, and again, I think that, for example, failing. So we talked a bit about fundraising. I'm fast forwarding here, way to sort of close where I am now. But when you go out and you try and raise money for a company, you get 99 no's for every yes, and that can be really disheartening if you let it get to you. Whereas if you speak to lots of other people who have been through the process, they'll tell you that you're going to get 99 no's, and just make sure that every no that you get, you try and understand what went wrong. And by the time you get to your 100th, you're going to be ready for the yes. I think the other thing that I would say, I think I've gotten much better, having changed careers quite a few times now, at recognizing that every time I start something, I'm going to be really, really shit at it. So the first time maybe this is a good example. The first week or month that I was at BCG, right? BCG is a very different kettle of fish to being a doctor. So you've just about got your head around being a doctor, and then you leave and then you go into this new world. And actually by that point, I had been in medicine for 10 years because I'd done a 6-year degree and then 4 years as a doctor. And then I was going to this new place. And so you're used to being vaguely proficient at what you're doing. And you've also got this title that means something to people. And you expect to be able to turn up and hit the ground running and be really good. And I was rubbish at that job for a long time. And I was told the day that I joined that I would be very bad at that job. And that, you've just got a lot to learn as a medic. You've got no life experience when it comes to building businesses, understanding businesses, opening an Excel spreadsheet, opening up a PowerPoint. You just don't know. So get ready. And because, people that went there were quite academic, they also said, but you're going to think that you're the exception to this, but you're not. You're going to be really bad at this. So just get used to it. Just get on board. Just lean in. This is going to be really miserable. So I think I've got better at understanding that process and just embracing it, as opposed to feeling uncomfortable when things aren't going well. Eventually, you'll get out of it and you'll be able to look back and go, God, I was very bad, and now I vaguely understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. And that never stops, and it probably shouldn't ever stop.
But you said you enjoyed your degree. Do you sometimes look at a task or a job or whatever and somehow train yourself to enjoy the process?
I think so. I think
that's
so.
a real trait some successful people have, of finding a way to enjoy whatever they're doing. Because there must be aspects of your work that you hate, right? And yet,
it's a good question.
Every time I say a word like hate, I see your face wince because you just don't like those words.
I think, the thing is that I think you're basically saying optimism to some kind of degree, and finding the benefits. But I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, because I think it takes a certain type of brain to appreciate that. I have ADHD, so if I find something so overwhelming, an Excel sheet, I can look at it and I can really try and focus on it for 2 hours, and I get even more overwhelmed. And it's not because I'm not trying or not trying to enjoy it. I'm so overwhelmed that my brain can't take it. And I think that there comes a point as well of recognizing what you do enjoy. Definitely. And being able to also ask for help / delegate / get someone else on board. I think there's power in that, rather than being like, I'm going to be so optimistic about this thing I hate, because you're wasting time on the things that you really love and can do even better and be more productive at.
Work on your strengths rather than your weaknesses.
I can completely believe that. So I've obviously ended up in a place where maybe I've been able to link up the things that I'm naturally good at with what I enjoy. There are loads of things that I'm not very good at. One thing that I noticed recently, I'm so bad at directions. It is, but it's like, it's paralyzed. Like I left, right, I'll do a loop round and be like, where am I just come from? And it's the same thing. If I were to actually sit down and think about, how am I going to just get better at this? I think it would really stress me out, because, maybe I'm just not very good at directions, and that's fine. So I think I'm not saying that this is universal. I'm saying for this application that I've obviously naturally veered towards, that's where I think I'm better at it.
So let's talk a little bit about why you left medicine. So you graduated, and then what happened?
Yeah. So I became a doctor. I did my F1, my F2 years in London, in hospitals, like everybody else does. And I think your first years coming out of any kind of healthcare degree, you're very bad. You're very helpless, and you've been promised that you're going to be this useful person to your patients. And actually, I didn't find that I was very useful. I felt like I was doing ward rounds and getting bloods and x-rays, but I thought I was basically going to be house, and I wasn't. So the first 2 years is a bit of a reckoning, and then again you start to get better. And then I decided that I wanted to be an eye surgeon. I just decided that was my specialty. So I went down the route of trying to be an eye surgeon, but at the same time I'd set up my first business, which was an educational business. So it was a tutoring business that helped kids do basically STEM subjects. So I was doing these two things at the same time, and then I realized, going deep into this ophthalmology world, that sitting in a dark room with not very many people was really not good for me. It was really not where I wanted to be. I'm someone that really values sunlight. I am a completely different person in summer to winter. So actually, even though the subject matter, the eye, was fascinating to me and I loved it, that environment, sitting in a room in the dark, because you have to have the lights off in ophthalmology, because you have to have the eyes dilated. I don't think I can do this forever. So I completely changed. I went to A&E, and I loved A&E. Complete opposite, like noise, chaos, a lack of structure, great fun. But I also thought, I mean, can I do this forever? I don't really know. I think you have a lot of choice in healthcare when you're young to decide where you want to go, and sometimes there's a little bit of a paralysis around what do I choose. So I really started to think about whether this career was ticking all of the boxes for me. I think there was a lot that it had to offer, but I'd started this business. I was starting to really enjoy running it. I was starting to think about other things outside of medicine that I could do. And to your point about Leeds and the fact that you're hanging out with the artists, because Oxford was a college-based system, I didn't just hang out with the medics. There was only 6 of us in the college. There were loads of people doing loads of other things. So all my friends were doing many different other jobs. Yeah. And they ended up, when I moved to London, we moved in together, and they were all doing these cool kind of finance jobs. And I was exposed to lots of other careers that I think opened my eyes a bit to the world of to the real world, I would say. And then I met some people who had gone into consulting, didn't even know what it was. I don't know if actually many people know what it is. Going in and advising other companies on their strategy and how they should run their company, it just doesn't really make sense. And just thought that was a really good way to combine what I was doing in medicine with the real world. And so spent some time trying to get in, right? That wasn't easy either. Again, a very kind of rigorous application process, not dissimilar to getting into university. And I did, and I guess there's no more creative than that. I think in that process, what I discovered was the benefit of asking people for help. Asking people for help is not something that was that common for medics, even as a student, really. You kind of get on and do your job. Whereas this was a world where I was like, I do not know anything about this. I'm going to have to ask lots and lots of people to help me understand this. And that, I think, is something that has carried me quite a long way. And understanding that most people are incredibly generous with their time if they have knowledge to share, if you're willing to go and ask the right questions and show that you've done a little bit of thinking and a bit of homework and you understand their value. It's made a huge difference to everything that I've done since.
How are medics, and for the sake of it, dentists, seen by something like a consulting company? I mean, there's going to be people listening to this who are thinking, hey, I might have a go at that.
Yeah.
Are we seen, healthcare professionals seen as a good bet or not a good bet?
Gosh, when I left...
I think it's a good bet. That's my hunch.
Well, that's what people said. And then I left thinking, because people had said, oh, you're a medic, they'll love that. And in reality, no one cares.
At all. They just thought it was only
no one cares. Yeah. Are you good at this job? You're a doctor and that was great, good for you, but I need you to now do this job. That was really, really strange, because you're so used to being put on a pedestal and revered. And
but it's not a negative.
It's not a negative. No, it's not. It's not. It's sort of.
But it's a non-entity, is what she's saying. Like, isn't it mixed?
Yeah. You would have thought
you
could even see it as a negative, because we sort of don't know about Excel and.
There's a little bit of that. There's also the fact that you spent a long time doing it. So when I went to PhD, I was competing, but the people in my intake, and I was learning the same thing as them, were 21, and I was, so you've done other things for a long time, so now you're a bit older, and you're having to go right back to the beginning, and you kind of feel like, well, I'm sort of owed a little bit of credit for everything that I've done here, but you don't get any credit because you don't know how to do any of this stuff. So I think. What I will say, though, is that people really understood the value of being good with people. I think that's a skill that you can't teach. You get it from experience. A 21-year-old won't have the experience that you've had dealing with patients every single day and what that brings from an emotional perspective and how you have to behave. And I think you can translate the way that you behave in front of a patient, you know, quite nicely to how you behave when you're in front of a client. It's very similar. So I think medics are and dentists are trusted to understand what to say and when to say it. And that's actually the thing that is valuable in the world. All the other hard skills, and when I say hard, I don't mean they're difficult, I mean like things that you learn, like Excel. They're pretty, I mean, anyone, you can learn how to do that. That's not difficult. So I think that's the bit where you know, medics, dentists need to realize that that's where you have an advantage. You know, people trust you as an individual to not just be trustworthy, but to know how to deal with human beings, real human beings.
Did you feel like you were thriving in a boardroom more so than you were in a A&E room?
Eventually probably yes. I mean, I don't think you can thrive. I don't know if you can thrive in A&E. I'm trying to think about what that might look like.
Well, you can't.
No.
That was a trick question because
I hated it.
Because I'll tell you why. It's not even that, but I think like
you enjoyed it.
the healthcare system to me is extremely flawed. I think there was a dentist, you might have seen this, that posted something about a vet bill recently, like it was like an animal, and
I paid $400 for my vet. How come my patients don't pay me more?
Exactly. No, and then it was like, basically the whole premise was there was a photo of a animal, and it was like the vet bill cost, I don't know, £800 or whatever. And then the dentist had written it saying the whole healthcare system is flawed because we have patients that are saying that we're ripping them off, but they're happy to pay for the vet bill, but not for the root canal or the fillings or whatever it is. And they said, you know, it's a flaw in the system. And I think that's really the problem, because I think medicine really put me off from the beginning. I saw my dad struggle on the NHS. He's been on the podcast as well, talking about his NHS journey. I'll never forget about when he told me that he was a junior doctor and the consultant in the osteo department like made him hold up someone's leg for like 7 hours. My dad moved a bit and then he had a go at him, and he was like, he had dandruff on his shoulders, and he's a typical consultant. And my dad was saying like the whole system was awful. And now we have this new generation of dentists, junior doctors, that are like, no, we're not doing this. Like, we have enough knowledge and we're better equipped to say this is not okay. But unfortunately, the public still aren't on our side. The public are still like, no, we've paid for your education. You owe us. I once had someone tell me off on TikTok, and this is going to make you laugh, on Instagram, because he said that I don't represent the modern day Florence Nightingale. That's literally what he said to me, because I'd been on the BBC and I was giving oral health advice, and he's like, but you don't look like Florence Nightingale. I'm like, but who knows what Florence Nightingale would have been like if she had Instagram? Just saying, number one. And number two, you can't expect, like, it's the notion that we are just here to give our life and soul. And the reality is, if we are not well within ourselves, physical and mental, we can't give to patients. That's the reality.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I told the story before about this time in A&E when it was 2 a.m. and I weaned myself off of caffeine to be able to do night shifts. So I would be really sensitive to caffeine, and then at 2 a.m. I would go in and I would get my fix, and I'd be buzzing for the rest of the night. But obviously there was no cost to open, so I would go into the official patient kitchen, which is a fridge and a counter, and I would get the world's most disgusting instant coffee, and I would make myself a coffee now down in the corner. And then one day a nurse, someone caught me and said, "You can't have that. That's patient coffee." And I was like, I cannot, I don't know how you're supposed to do this job when you're, to your point, giving everything emotionally, physically. I haven't weed for 8 hours, and then to be told that I can't have patient coffee. The balance between the way that we treat our junior doctors in particular, but also, throughout. I mean, it happens in the community as well, in primary care, the expectation that patients have because they don't see the bill, right? That you don't see the NHS bill that you incur, not the real one. Yeah. So you don't ascribe value to it.
They actually show them the bill.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. So the way it works in Holland, because it's insurance-based, is that you will see you don't pay it, you see it. So you suddenly see, well, actually that cost £15,000. I better be grateful for it.
That's
and I better be
interesting, isn't
grateful
it?
for the person who
I think that's a really good thing
care.
that we should be doing.
Like if the NHS at the end of your
100%.
treatment says this treatment costs the NHS 20 grand.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I think because then they'll start to appreciate the value of it.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a conflict, right? And I think the only thing to blame is when you see certain doctors and dentists, particularly the ones that work in aesthetics, that start showing like their really flashy lifestyle, and then there's people that can't get an appointment because they have a toothache. And I think that's also where the conflict resides, where people, I'm not saying they don't have a right to live that lifestyle, but that's what they're seeing, right? It's the old age tale of, you know, the prince and the pauper. Marie Antoinette, you know, gives that dialogue, you know, of people not caring and not being in touch with what the public are going through. So it's a difficult one to battle. But when you had left medicine, did you have any regrets initially?
No, I think about this a lot. So regret number one, it's not a regret, but I think what you feel very, very quickly is the disappointment collectively of your peers and your family. So Indian, part of the family's Indian. I mean, to give up your Oxford education and then give up medicine for what? To go and work in some God knows what you're doing now. So that's number one. And then I think that there's a lot of guilt, even, because I get approached once a week on LinkedIn by a medic who wants to leave to say, how did you do it? I think I want to do it, but I don't know how. And when I talk to them, because a lot of people gave me advice, so I try and talk to as many people as I can. Guilt is the first thing that's going through their mind of like, what am I giving up? And am I allowed to do this? Because someone else has paid for my education, and that's the first thing. And then I think what you move on into a new world, right? It's an entirely different world with different rules, and there are now new things that are stresses. There are new things that are benefits. And then you start to, what floats to the top is actually, what did I really value in that previous career? And what did I take completely for granted? Yeah. So when I left medicine and I went into this new world where, for example, every meal was paid for, I was given a taxi home every night, and 5-star hotels when I was seeing clients, in exchange for, here is a phone, when it rings you will pick it up. It doesn't matter what day it is, and it doesn't matter what time it is, you are working, in exchange for the things that I had completely taken for granted in medicine, which is connecting with a human being that is not buying a service from you, where you don't have to, they're sort of buying a service, but where you really are trying to do your best to help them on a human level, and where they are putting an enormous amount of trust in you, just for the fact that you're wearing a set of scrubs and that you've got a steth around your neck and a lanyard. Those are the things that, now that I am somewhere else, is the reason why people want to come and work in, for example, a healthcare startup. That connection to, I'm having an impact every single day, and I can see it in that person's eyes that they're grateful for what I've done. I've given them something to help their pain, or I've improved their confidence even from something that I've done aesthetically. Most jobs don't have that. Yeah. They really don't.
That a heartfelt thank you from a patient.
It's amazing.
It doesn't exist in the world of business.
It really doesn't.
It really
and
doesn't.
I think that's the thing, like, people are like, that emotional connection that you can convey through medicine and dentistry is really difficult to convey in any other job. I totally agree. I had a patient that came in yesterday, and she was really nervous, couldn't even look at her photos. And she was like, it was all of your patient reactions that got me here, because I feel like you have the ability to make people so happy. And it's crazy. Like, on the one hand, I was a bit like, oh my God, like, does she think I have the ability? I don't have that superpower. But then I recognise that people can really feel that emotion through the screen by me simply recording someone's...
When it's real.
When it's real. Like, I'm not giving them onions to kind of like burst into tears,
The weird thing about it is, like, it doesn't even make any sense. I mean, of course it makes sense. We're a community of humans and all that. But, if to think that is the thing that's driving most of us at work, like that sort of Maslow's the hierarchy of needs sort of thing.
But that's why you end up being able to underpay doctors, because you're like, well, you've got all of this prestige, and you get all these thank
and the
yous and the pension and the box of celebrations after, that is why I think you get we allow as medics it to get to the point where it really is too much.
Yeah.
You know, in other professions, you would just leave the job.
Yeah.
You would just leave the job, and they don't, you know, because you're part of this enormous machine, the NHS, and you feel like you have a duty.
That reliance of the goodwill on the goodwill
Yeah.
of the doctors and nurses these days, unfortunately, they're so jaded.
Yeah.
That the goodwill isn't there anymore. You know, your dad doesn't work in hospitals anymore, does he?
No, but
my brother says
difficult.
the juniors they haven't got that goodwill anymore. You know,
What do you mean by that?
you know, in our day, let's say you were on call last weekend, yeah, and now they're telling you to work next weekend as well, yeah. There would be something in you that was you're trying to please your bosses and who's going to do the work and their patients. Your goodwill to the system would say, "Oh, I'll do that weekend as well."
But you're saying junior doctors now don't.
Today, people just stand up for their rights.
But I think that, like, you know, it's difficult because sometimes as well, being a practice owner that interviews a plethora of people, and my practice represents extreme diversity, I find it really difficult working with Gen Z for those reasons. Like, I'm not coming in today because I've got period pains. I'm like, do you know what I mean? Like, I literally, unless I was dying, I used to come in. So I'd be like, how could this nation? But then the other part of me is like, there's so much education coming on about like female hormones and all this stuff. And maybe they are the generation that's understanding that you can take time off and that it is important. And actually your period is also linked to your mental health. But I don't know, like, I don't know what the answer is, because also you need a balance to keep business going. And as you said, as we have responsibility to take care of patients, who's going to take care of the patients if you don't come to work today? Yeah. And I think our sense of, you know, that saying,
duty.
you know, yeah, that sense of duty, because like, you know, you'll always remember like at dental school when people like, when you're learning about like finger grips or how to place your hand, and they say always better to cut yourself than the patient, right? And you know, that has quite a metaphorical meaning as well, right? It's like you become last immediately, and that's again a bit like the Hippocratic Oath as well. Like, we know that we have a sense of duty to look after everyone else before ourselves, which is why it becomes almost impossible for us to manage our own mental health, our own health in general. And I think it's a really tricky one.
And as an owner as well, I think that you're right. So I'm speaking there from perhaps a different generation where there was a very strong sense of duty. And when I ask friends now who, for example, imagine this, right? I have friends who are pediatric surgeons, right? And there's one of you, right? There's one person who can fix this part of a baby today in London, and the other dude's sick, so can you come in? Under what circumstances are you going to say no, right? It's so... People need to, I think, understand when they see doctors that that is also what they're going through, that a small thank you or a recognition that that they're people who are trying to live the same life as you when they go home goes a long way.
And you know, there might be a 6-year-old son who didn't have his dad on his birthday because of that.
Exactly.
You know,
but it's a good question about Gen Z. I think it's
you must have Gen Z's working for you now.
This is the difficult thing. So in a I mean, yes, but I don't know if people identify as Gen Z. I think you're talking about a type of a way of thinking and a way of putting different things at the forefront of your life versus, you know, the millennial.
Yeah.
And I find it just as difficult, really difficult to tease apart. Look, we're a young business that is growing very quickly, and things change. And this is not a big corporate where you can get lost, and if you don't turn up one day, it'll be fine. Someone will feel like every person is incredibly valuable, and if you're not, then this is not the right place for you. And if you're not willing to take on that responsibility of me and the rest of the team being able to put the trust in you, you're going to turn up and you're going to own what you're doing and you're going to deliver, then you're not just... I sound like my mum. Not just letting yourself down, you're letting the team down, right? There are other people who are relying on you, and I find it really difficult to, firstly, to understand when you're interviewing someone where they're going to land when the shit hits the fan. Like, where are they going to land on the look? I'm gonna give it my all.
Because that's happening all the time, right? That's happening all the time. So you need to know the answer to that question.
I think that's why like probations are so important, and like having that period to really reassess. But again, also like the recruitment process in dentistry is like the worst thing about owning a business. I just loathe it and hate it so much.
In general.
Yeah, and I just think, but you know, as you said, like, because the most important thing, I mean, obviously running a business is running a business, but you really worry about the patient. You're like, the nurse has not turned up, then you've got a temp, and then the temp's upsetting. Do you see what I mean? It has such a domino effect, you know what I mean? Like, the dental system really is so reliant, you know, on the team working together. Like, everything falls apart.
In the same way, if one of her team doesn't turn up one day, you're not going to get your aligners, and then that's going to have the same
or that project
effect.
that was really important. You know, we're going to have to push it by a week. It's I think the yes, there's the balance between the rights that you feel that you have as a person, not just in work but in society, and the responsibilities, I think, is always shifting. And I think it's always been, you know, maybe a little bit far to one side, but I think it's a little bit over onto the I know exactly what my rights are, and I'm sort of ignoring the responsibility bit. And look, I think it's being driven by the right things, like you say. You know, it's not all good having people feeling like they are constantly under pressure to deliver at work, and that they cannot have a life outside of work, and they cannot have...
But I really think people are moving away from that. I really, really think people now are really... I mean, within dentistry, I'm hearing more and more, and I'm seeing even my own workplace, like dentists, most of them want to work part-time now. Yeah. They literally want their day to have off. A lot of them want to become content creators. Do you know what I mean? There's all this stuff. So I think we've seen a massive movement. You know,
that's Gen Z, isn't it?
But you're seeing it across the millennial board. Like, and when I say Gen Z, I mean people kind of like in their 20s, but really they're still technically millennials, right? As in, if you look at the cusps and the numbers, exactly. And it's really like just the baby boomers, which are our parents' generation, are very much like, no, this is the way it is. You rock up. My dad, you've got chicken pox, go to school, it costs me £400 a day to send you to school. It's going to happen. So
I want to know, Sonia, what would you consider as being your darkest day? Maybe break it into this business, 32 Code.
Yeah.
Or medicine.
I want to know more about the business. Can we go into that?
We'll go into that. Yeah.
So you think about what's the worst thing that could happen here as a business owner, right? You're thinking about, you know, something bad happening to a patient. For me, it's really up there with a bad thing happening, because number one, I care, and number two, that has knock-on effects to the trust that people have. And we're in healthcare, we're very much in a trust-based business. So that's the kind of first bucket, and luckily we've had none of that. Second bucket is, can I keep this thing alive? Right? Can I look after not just the customers, but my team who I've built, who've put their trust in...
How many are you?
Me. We're about 70 people now.
70 now. Oh.
Can I keep this thing going? And to your previous point around, if you bootstrap a company, you start with, you know, no money, and then you make money, and then you hire people as you go, and you run a profitable business. And to some extent, you have a sense of what you can afford to spend on a weekly, monthly basis. In venture, it's the opposite, right? Someone gives you money ahead of time, and then you grow into the valuation. And
occasionally buy your way out of trouble, right? And
you go back and ask for more money. That's a very normal part. You say, look, we've hit these milestones. I think now we're worth much more than we were last time. You know, we need more money to fuel this next phase of growth.
But what I'm saying is, it can cause a sort of a false situation as well. You don't end up learning a lesson of not being able to afford that thing because you can.
The world of venture has gone through an enormous change in the last 2 years. So in 2020, 2021, it was the interest rates were so low that anyone could raise money for anything, right? So you go to a venture investor, you say, look, I've got this great idea, I haven't done a single thing, it's, you know, just written down here, I think I need $10 million. And they say, here's $10 million. And the system was just awash with cash, and there were people who did very sensible things with that money, and they grew businesses, they hired the right people, they built value in either in a product or in an idea or in, you know, in a community. And then there were also people who, you know, as you said, were like, great, we've got 10 million quid in the bank. Let's go and buy a swanky office, and just the stories that you hear from people about the things that were invested in that make no sense for a young company. There was, I think, just a lot of irresponsible, not just allocation of capital, right? Because the VCs have a responsibility to sensibly give money, but also how that was then spent. And we've seen in the last year that it's completely changed. It's now very difficult to raise money, and you really, really have to have proven that you've hit those milestones. And a lot of those businesses don't exist anymore. So that is where the sleepless nights come in. And it's less of a kind of, we've had this one big day. It's just a constant nagging thing that you're thinking about. Are we getting this right? Are we getting this right? Because, you know, you've got a roadmap that you're trying to hit, and everything has to go right, or a lot of things have to go right, to make sure that you hit what you said you're going to hit.
But what kind of a toll does it take on you mentally, and how do you get out of it when you're in that situation?
I think I used to be worse at it. I think I've really learned how to cope with those thoughts. I think number one, having a clear plan of what you're going to do gives you a sense of peace, because you can sort of see, well, look, I can sort of think, I can see we're going to get there, and then it's not a big leap to get there, and then I can think, you can sort of see it in front of you, and that takes away some of the worry, I suppose. Personally, for me, there are lifestyle things that I've had to do to make this feasible. I mean, I'll be honest, I work a lot. I work weekends, I work late, and a lot of my team do too.
Has that had an effect on your relationship and your personal life?
Yes and no. I think in the beginning it was, all hands on deck, and, you can forgive anyone anything for, working so many hours, because it's all very exciting and it's important. I think as it's become the norm, I've had to set sort of rules in place, not just for myself, but also for my partner, to say, look, we're signed up to this gig, that is going to mean X, Y, and Z, but it also means that I'm going to make time for time together where, and I literally have to say, right now we are not talking about work. I do not want to talk about work for the next, this much time. Don't look at phones, right? So there's in the morning, I don't look at my phone until a certain time, and I really try and use that time to prepare for the day, and not to just dive into the emails and dive into the chaos that is about to kick off. So protecting the time in the morning, exercising, so every morning, just trying to get out, even if it's just for a quick jog or into the gym. Those are the sorts of rules that I've had to put in place to make it workable, and none of it is rocket science, right? It's all the stuff that very sensible.
But the relationship can give. It tends to be the first thing to give, because the business isn't going to give.
So look, as a female entrepreneur, before we started chatting on here, sorry, Pay, you probably don't have much to kind of comment on this, but you can. I asked you if Payman was talking about children, and asked you if you had children, and you said, I asked if you're child free, and you said, language is really important, because you didn't say childless. I didn't even cross my mind to say childless. I just said child free, because I think that we've recognized that women are making decisions now. And the crazy thing is, around the female body, around our hormones, around the rules, the people that have set the rules are really all men, sorry to say this. And I've really delved into this over the last few weeks, and I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy, and we've barely had any input over the centuries on our own rights and bodies. And obviously that's changing now, and we're challenging things. But children is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot as I approach my kind of mid to late 30s. It's something that is on my mind, and I think, the biological clock, of course, dictates that. It's difficult as an entrepreneur and a business owner, because you've got one baby, which is your business, and then you think about another baby. What are your feelings with regards to that subject as I'm talking about it?
Yeah, you're right. We don't have the same decision-making powers as men do, because you could have a child and no, it's not like nothing would change, but you would continue to work.
I could get back to work the same way as I was before.
And I just don't think that it's as easy for women. That being said, I have spent a lot of time, and I do spend a lot of time with female founders and female CEOs and talk about this actually. And I would say the reassuring thing is that every single one of them that's had a child and runs extremely successful businesses, some of them are, have built unicorns, it's possible. And you will figure it out. It's universally, the feedback that I've had is that you worry about it and you think, is it the right time? Is it now? Should I do it in 6 months? And actually, because you've got to this point in building a business and everything that you've built up until now was also very difficult, you're clearly the kind of person who will just figure it out. So if this is something that's important to you, then do it. And you will do what is needed to make both work. But I can't advise you now, or you can't know now what you're going to have to do to prepare yourself for that. Because how could you possibly know what it's going to feel like to bring another human into the world that is, you've got children. I'm sure you couldn't have described before you had your children how that would have felt and how that would have changed. Yeah. So maybe it's not.
But how do you feel?
So I take a lot from that. As I said, I spend a lot of my time talking to different people to try and get an understanding and almost to try and get the wisdom from people who've been there before. So my view on this is that I should take that very seriously, which is that if I want children, and I think at some point I will, I don't right now, then I will put the steps in place. Well, if I'm fortunate enough that I can have children, I mean, there's another big question mark.
Yeah.
That I don't know. I haven't done a huge amount of research into it.
We've actually got a podcast on egg freezing, my dad and Sarita, 2 separate ones. So there we go, worth a listen.
But I mean, why are we needing so much help with female fertility now? Why is it so hard for women to conceive? Is it maybe because we're leaving it a little bit later, or is it because there are just stresses and strains and things that
I think we're leaving it later
that happen in life?
We're definitely leaving it later.
Yeah, we are leaving it later, and it's like I'm already going to be, and sorry, you are too, geriatric mother, as they make the term. But the problem is, Sonia said, actually, whilst I have a lot of followers and friends on Instagram, like some of them are having problems conceiving as young as like 28, 29. And that's young still in my eyes. Okay, sure, maybe our parents' generation. My mum was considered old at 27, in the 80s. That's crazy,
That's the point.
But
28,
I think
29 would have been old, not old, but
yeah.
No,
it is, And this is the kind of scary thing, because it plays such a pivotal role, I think, in women also feeling like they can't do certain things. I always wonder, would more women be taking over the world in terms of like roles like CEO, presidents, and everything like that? And it's a really difficult thing, because I'm not saying that I'm here to exert all of this masculine energy, but I just think it's very interesting, because you've got to make certain decisions. And
look, we've had this discussion 100 times, right? And I've always said to you, you've got to take childcare out of the discussion if you're just simply talking about men and women. I mean, I think that's an interesting question. Let's put children to one side. Do you think being a woman in the business world has been more difficult than it would have been if you're a man?
Yes, I think so.
Why?
By the way, we debated this with Sarita.
No, but why for her?
And Payman's still yet to find a woman that says no, but go on.
Yes, and it's not a woe is me. I think there are also advantages to being a woman that, again, sometimes you don't even know that it's happening. But like it or not, people look at women and make assumptions about what they will or won't do in terms of their career. So if you are looking...
Again, around childcare, right?
So what you mean about if you were to remove...
If it was possible to remove, like cut and paste the whole childcare point out of the equation, day to day, you're running a company, you're raising money, is being a woman disadvantageous?
Oh, if you completely...
If it was possible to.
So, you don't have to breastfeed, and the role of the woman...
Talking about gender pay gaps, all these different things.
I don't believe in gender pay gap.
Yeah.
Do you?
So let me my perspective is that I grew up in a country, so in the Netherlands. I actually also.
Oh my God, they're awful, the Dutchmen. Sorry to anyone. I was mind blown. So I went to Africa Burn last year, and there were loads. So obviously, there's loads of Dutch people that are very similar to the South Africans. There was loads of them there, and I was mind blown about how like the women act like men, and the men were so useless. And I was like, oh my God, the women are literally paying for everything, like making all the moves and all this stuff. And I was like, what's weird?
Dutch women are just headstrong.
Where do you think the
they're amazing.
where do you
I
think?
love that about them.
But where did you think the saying "Let's go Dutch" comes from? Right, like they don't like men to pay for them. They don't, anyways. So one of my best friends ended up moving to Amsterdam, and she was like, whatever, the guy's really hot. Like she was going through this like kind of like new single era of her life. Back within 4 months, like, babe cannot deal with the Dutchmen. She was like, it was horrendous. And I don't want to generalize, but she was like, chivalry is dead. They don't want to hold doors. They don't want to buy you drinks. Yeah. They have this thing called tikkie, where they're like, I'll tikkie you, and like everything is like, and the women are the ones that like rule the roost, basically.
Yeah.
Look, if you're into that, and that's why I find it really funny, because when people are like, oh my God, Rhona, you're such a feminist and stuff, like, yes, I am. But when it comes to like, I like to feel desired, and part of feeling desired is a man looking after me. Yeah.
They have their version of that too. Go ahead.
So that's, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I grew up in an environment where men and women really weren't treated differently. So I would play football on the street with the boys. There really wasn't a big difference. I also don't remember noticing that I was a different colour to people.
Yeah,
it wasn't discussed. It wasn't a thing. And I played a lot of European handball when I was growing up. So my whole life was at the handball club, and boys and girls were the same. We mixed, we trained together. So this idea that men and women were different really hasn't been part of my life, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so I think therefore, when you then introduce something that is a very traditionally female role, which is the childcare part of it, I think that is where you see the difference. If you were to remove that entirely, which I think is very difficult, because ultimately, the woman carries the baby. You've got the hormones.
Once you bring the children into it, of course, there's a difference. There is a difference. There's no doubt
You really
about
think
it.
that men and women are equal? Take out the kids.
Yeah, man.
In work,
anything in life.
Yeah, work. Let's start with work.
Come on, there's been so many, like, we even talk about, for example, did you watch that Anne Hathaway film? I forgot what it's called now. Anyways, the film was there was the assumption that it was basically talking about Olivia Wilde and Harry Styles, and I'll tell you why. So she is a 40-year-old woman that gets cheated on by her husband classically. He leaves for someone younger. She takes her daughter to a concert. There's the equivalent of like a One Direction group. Harry Styles type character. He fancies her. He's 25. She's 40. They have an affair. Yada, yada, yada. It's quite a playful film. I think it's like based on a novel. Anyways, and then there was this whole debate online about how women also get treated differently in that sense. Like, you can be a really old guy and date really young women and no one will say anything. And then when she dated the younger guy, she was called a cougar, a baby snatcher, a cradle snatcher. So come on.
No, but that is just like uneducated thinking.
Yeah,
right?
but Payman, this is the whole thing. You assume that all people are educated and think like you. That is not the case. You've even said to me.
No, but day to day in the workplace. Let's stick to the work.
I don't operate in the normal world, Payman, at all, right?
Yes.
I get to
No,
pick.
in your world.
But I get to pick exactly who I bring into the business. So I'm going to be bringing people in who represent what I think. So we have a very diverse team, not because I have hired for diversity, but because by hiring the smartest people, you will end up with a diverse group of people. I have as many women as men. So we're bringing people in to this very unusual environment, which is a fast-growing startup that's sort of supported by some of the top investors, and that's not the real world, not for most people.
So at BCG, did you feel...
Again, not the real world.
Can Sonia just tell me a little bit, because Payman wanted to go off on a tangent, but tell me about your company then and how it started.
So I started the company after BCG, and I'd spent a year just after BCG working in a health tech company. So building a health tech company, we were building an app for patients with haemophilia. So I was spending a lot of time on the cutting edge of healthcare and of medicine. So I'd gone through this career as a clinician and then as a consultant, a lot of which was spent in healthcare. So seeing how healthcare businesses run, from NHS trusts to pharma companies, and then into the world of health tech. And I was seeing so much cool innovation on that side. And I was looking at essentially everything that was being brought to market, from new devices, new pharmaceutical treatments, and then thinking, yeah, but if I was still a doctor, there is no way that I'm using any of this stuff, at least for a generation. And why is that? Because
funding.
How are you supposed to learn how to use this stuff? Where's number one, where's the teaching, where's the understanding, where's knowledge, where's the incentive for me to try something new? Actually, this
you're
stuff...
You're never at the cutting edge in clinical
You're never
medicine.
at the cutting edge. And especially in primary care, it might be for a tertiary, specialist hospital, you might get access to this cool stuff. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, wouldn't it have been cool if I were still a doctor? Those are the sorts of things that have made me excited about looking after patients, because this is where the action is. And I feel like you're 10, sometimes 20 years behind in the kind of healthcare that you're able to deliver as a frontline clinician. So what would it take to get that stuff into the hands of your normal doctor, your normal dentist? That's where the thinking came from. And it came down a lot to really trying to understand and really get into the head of the average doctor or dentist and say, why is it so difficult to try new things? Well, it's risk. You are never going to take an unnecessary risk on a patient. If someone says to you, "I'll pay £1 million, Rhona, put this in your patient's mouth," you'll be like, "I'm not taking that. I don't know what that is." That people, I think, need to realize that, to your point about, dentists being money grabbing potentially because they've got a nice car, 99.9% of dentists, if I said, "I'll give you £1 million to stick this random thing in their mouth," they would say, "No, we're not doing that." So risk aversion, not wanting to take risks, and also just not understanding what it is and not feeling comfortable were big barriers. So I started to think about, well, how could I unblock that? And I think it's fundamentally down to the experiences going right back to when I was in A&E, where there were times when I felt like I could do cool new things. So I could do a lumbar puncture for the first time on a patient. Why was I able to do that? Because I would do some reading. I would actually learn about this technique. Yeah. Then I would get an anaesthetist to come and sit next to me and do it with me. And that gave me completely different superpowers as a doctor. So the fact that I was in, and A&E is one of the only places where you have this. You have every single expert in every field just there. You can walk up to them and say, "Hey, I've got this thing. I've no idea what it is. Can you come and help me look at this?" And most doctors and dentists, especially in primary care, don't have that unless you work you've got specialists in your clinic, unless you've got specialists right there. So, I wanted to build something that would help the average clinician get access to the world expert in the thing that the patient had that was in front of them, so that they could start to deliver that care there, as opposed to that patient having to go and travel to wherever that was. And that's basically the concept behind 32Co. So we started in orthodontics because, one of the reasons was because there was an explosion in direct-to-consumer online orthodontics. And I didn't know that much about dentistry at the time. I'd spent a bit of time in COVID, thinking about how to deliver treatment remotely for patients when the dentists were shut. And so I started to talk to dentists and started to ask them, why is this allowed? I've had braces. How is it possible that you can go online and buy braces from
Small direct
goodness knows what, and then put it in your mouth? That can't be legal. And also, why are they not just coming to you to get this treatment? Why don't they you're right next door, they're your dentist. So it came down to the fact that not every dentist offers this treatment, and it's a very specialist type of healthcare, and it's something that orthodontists are trained in, and so it's just not something that everyone does, and it's not something that everyone actually promotes. So patients were finding it much easier just to go online and buy that. So I wanted to build something that would help the average dentist deliver the highest quality orthodontic treatment with the greatest degree of certainty by working with the top experts in the world. So basically building a collaboration platform between clinician and clinician, which really doesn't exist, to try and simulate that environment of, I can just walk up to you in A&E and just ask you, what do you reckon? I've not done many of these before, or I've done loads of these before, but how would you do this? Because I'm interested, because you might have a different opinion of how we might attack this. That's basically what we've built. And fast forward to now, it's a platform that dentists can join to deliver a line of care, but with that model where you get paired up with a specialist orthodontist who's in the UK, who's a real expert, who's going to work with you on that case in whatever capacity you want, whether it's just a second pair of eyes, or I actually really would like you to explain to me exactly how I'm supposed to do this based on your experience, so that we can together get the best outcome for the patient. And that's really the vision, to try and help reduce some of the sense of fear and isolation when you're a primary care provider alone, having to tackle things that maybe you're not the world expert in, because how can you possibly be the world expert in everything as a clinician, and where you've got a patient in front of you, and because you're trying to protect the patient-clinician relationship and the faith that they've placed in you, you don't want to say to them, I don't know how to do this, to change that conversation into, I do know how to do this, because I'm actually going to work with an expert and we're going to do it together. That's basically it.
Okay, I love it. Do you provide the aligners, or just
Yeah.
Super.
Are you still doing that model that you were doing before, where you explain the model? It's very interesting.
Yeah, so obviously we want to be able to provide that service for free as part of your aligners, right? So in order to be able to deliver this treatment, you have to not just have the treatment planning, but you also need to buy the aligners. Otherwise, it's a disjointed service. So what I spent a lot of time doing is looking at the aligner manufacturing market and thinking, and seeing that actually all of the big brands are making in the same enormous factories in places in Europe and in Mexico and in Egypt, and they were using the same materials, the same 3D printing technology, the same trim lines. This is all very, very advanced stuff that's come a long way, but anyone can buy it. So dentists were paying way over the odds for their aligners. I mean, really, the markups on these things were enormous. And we knew that if we went directly to them and essentially created a marketplace where, rather than the dentists having to beg for the best prices, we would negotiate on their behalf and get the best deals on the day from all the top manufacturers and make sure that they were being controlled for quality. And then, because there was so much margin in that, using some of that to pay to get the specialist involved, and then you'd be at a point where it's still less expensive, but also you're getting
so they put it out to tender every case, and then one of the manufacturers says, okay, I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So it could be one case could be from one factory, another case from a different factory, based on who needs the work.
Yeah.
Well, it's more about, so we don't let any factory on. It's really tightly controlled, so that everything is pre-screened. So we've probably worked with the top ones all over the world, and we have very strict checks on the quality.
How many?
There's probably about 20 big ones in the world
that you use,
that we have interviewed and worked with. We only have about 4 at any one moment that meet the mark, and the quality should be exactly the same across the board. So it's more that we can say, right, we've got a ton of dentists who all want the maximum money off. They want the lowest price they can get, so we'll pool all of their orders, and then we will be able to negotiate the best discounts for them. Because as an individual dentist, if you were to go to that manufacturer, they would never be able to give you good prices, because you're just one person, whereas if you lump everyone together, it's a much more of a democratized experience.
And the 70 people, how many of them are programmers, developers?
About a third. The
rest are sales and
operations, and then commercial. Yeah. So to build something like this, I mean, the platform itself is an incredibly complex beast to be able to make that feel like a very seamless experience. And I didn't know an awful lot about product or software development before I was in health tech. It's an entire art and science in and of itself, and something that it can, it makes or breaks companies, really. If you can get a product working really well, it reduces the amount of people that you need, as you can probably imagine. If you can automate things, then you don't need per new customer, you need fewer, incrementally fewer people. So that's a big part of it, is trying to get that right. And that's the challenge when you're working with that many people. You're trying to get everyone to go as fast as they possibly can, and not compromise on quality. That's a really difficult. That's the difficult thing of this job.
That might be the peculiarity of health tech, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in normal tech, they can just go fast, break things, and it's not the end of the world if there's a mistake.
Well, you're exactly right.
In fintech and health tech,
you're not.
People are going to lose lives and money.
Yeah. You're not just shipping something.
It's like, reminds me of that girl. What's the one that was like on the cover of Forbes, and then they all found out she was a massive con with her blood test.
Yeah,
Elizabeth Holmes.
That's it.
Yeah.
What a story, no?
What, Elizabeth Holmes?
No, this.
Yeah, of course. Incredible. I knew she was a powerhouse. We're on mind movers, not dental leaders, remember?
Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So now, going forward, having to raise money now, are you having to, like, I know, for instance, AI is the sort of the buzzword.
Yeah.
Are you almost having to include AI to be taken seriously by an investor?
It's a good question. I think that you'd be silly not to be using AI. We use AI.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to use it as a marketing tactic, I think you've got to be able to stand behind what you say, because eventually people are going to start to call you out.
You must know of cases of people who are doing that.
Of course. I mean, because all of these tools are publicly available now, anyone can log into GPT-4 and have a play. I know of lots of companies that are just a layer on top of GPT-4. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a valuable thing to do, but it means, you haven't built fundamentally the AI infrastructure that's driving this. So, yeah. But do you need to be talking about AI? I mean, it probably doesn't hurt to have an AI story if you're raising money now, but it's already very saturated. It's already very saturated. An enormous amount of money has already been deployed into AI, and now they have to see whether they can grow into those valuations. So I'd actually say you're maybe almost a little bit too late now to catch the early wave of AI. Wave. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
But what about with the business? I mean, where do you see it going? And I mean, where do you see yourself in the business going?
So for me, this was always about rolling out this model into lots of areas.
Not just ortho.
Not just ortho. This is about building a way of working where a clinician can work with another clinician, and they can share knowledge and expertise, so that clinician who has an awful lot of knowledge and a connection with that patient can do more. That's always been the vision. So,
and beyond dentistry, or you want to stick to dentistry?
I think dentistry at the moment, because I think there's just so much more that we can do to expand this way of working. And then going forward, I mean, there's so many use cases where you could probably imagine that it would be quite nice for you to, as a patient, to know that your doctor is in touch with the world expert on insert thing here.
I had the CEO of Pearl AI, and I was asking him, why dental?
Yeah.
Because he had an AI company that was looking at logos, and he turned that into looking at X-rays. I said, why dental? And he said that dentists are much earlier adopters of new technology.
Absolutely agree with that.
Than doctors.
Also the other thing is
the businesses are,
but again,
you can decide tomorrow.
It's when you're in what I call like the matrix of the hospital life, they make you feel like it's impossible to leave. And it's like my specialist friends were the ones that like really jaded and a little bit more guarded about trying new things. And also like my dad, I told you heard his story.
Yeah.
He was so desperate to leave the NHS, and he started to try to think about making like a shampoo business or like a soup business. And he met this business consultant. He was like, why wouldn't you be a private doctor? Because my dad thought it was so impossible to become a private doctor.
Really?
Because that's what he was brainwashed to believe. Like, you are in the system and you cannot leave the system, basically, unless you do something radically different.
Yeah.
But Sonia, looks right now,
and dentists are very much more open to innovation.
Ideas.
They're curious. I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
So, Sonia, what's your words of wisdom for young female entrepreneurs that want to start something that might be different to what they're used to, i.e. medicine, dentistry, or any vocation, and they don't even know where to start, but they know that they desperately want to leave their profession, what would be your words of advice?
The first thing I would say is speak to people who have done it.
Yeah.
The scariest thing, the crossing the chasm, is the leap into the unknown feels so insurmountable that it's almost always safer to just stay. Every time you sort of try and drift and you sort of look at the alternatives, you'll always be pulled back, because especially if you're in dentistry, you haven't got, you're making quite a good salary, you're making a decent amount of money, and you're an expert at that. So every time you're looking to move out, you're always going to be pulled back into the comfort zone. So speaking to people and asking them how they did it will help you feel comfortable in discomfort is probably the first thing. The second thing I would say is just do one small thing. It doesn't have to be the whole hog straight away. You don't have to, if you're interested in selling a business, it doesn't have to be a multi-billion-dollar business. I set up a small business, and then I set up in my head and tried to set up 5-6 other businesses that didn't work, and eventually you come upon something that does work. The first step is the biggest step, it's the most important step, and from there your world will be so much more, you will open up the world so much more to yourself. So don't try and go the whole hog straight away. Just take the first step and speak to people. Those are probably my first words of wisdom.
There's so many more dentists who now have business ideas.
That's great. Like when I went on Dragon's Den, everyone was like, "Oh my god, amazing!" And now you've got dentists going on like The Apprentice, and I think it's great. I think it's amazing.
No, but I get the question all the time, right? What should I do? How should I do? And my general advice to them is find an incubator, because that'll. I mean, in a way, your Boston Consulting days were your incubator, right? To understand what goes on in business.
Yeah.
But that'll kind of tell you if it's right or wrong, or if you're right or wrong.
Yeah, you can always go back, especially if you're in dentistry. You can always go back. That's.
Do you know what I would say? Always try to make the mistakes of the changes before you feel like you've got too many commitments. Because if you're 50 and suddenly, we discussed this last week,
mortgage,
then you've got a mortgage, 2 kids, and a wife that's a full-time housewife or something like that, and then you're like, but I can't physically do it.
Yeah.
So I think like better make the mistakes younger, and you can always pick yourself up. And like you said, you don't lose, or you don't win or fail, you win or you learn, because every failure has an opportunity for learning. And I think that's about changing and reframing the narrative. Yeah. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been an incredible chat. I'm so honoured to have a amazing female, who's an absolute boss woman and doing incredible things in the world. So thank you so much for joining us. And if people want to find your platform, could you direct them?
Yes, it's www.32co.com, or follow us on the Instagram. And if anyone does want to learn about life after healthcare and wants a bit of advice, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to help.
Amazing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much,
so much.
Sonia.
Thanks for having me.
Right.